Hi there and welcome to an introduction to the Cuckoo Bumblebees. My name is Clare Flynn and I'm the Project Officer for Skills for Bees Cymru. Okay, so we will be going over a general introduction and overview to the Cuckoo Bumblebees, including a little bit about their ecology, natural history, some general ID features to look out for, especially if you're a complete beginner to this group. And then some more detailed information on the 6 UK species and finishing off with links to ID help and recording. Okay, in the UK, we have 24 species of bumblebee in total, which I'm sure you're aware of. And 6 of these are cuckoo bumblebees, which we're finding out about. This lifestyle, if you like, this evolutionary behaviour and life history has occurred in many bee species across the world, with about 10% of them of all bee fauna globally being cuckoo bees of one sort or another. Okay, but these are our 6 UK species, and without further ado, we'll find out a bit more. So, the cuckoo bumblebees, we refer to them as social parasites. Okay, they are parasitic on the social bumblebees, and they do this by basically behaviour which allows them to invade and take over the nest of social bumblebees and use it just in the same way that a cuckoo bird will take over the nest of a smaller bird and get that bird to raise its young. So female cuckoo bees enter the nest of a social bumblebee. There are specific host-parasite interactions. The cuckoo bee will trick the workers in various ways and enter the nest, then subduing or killing the queen, often through quite a vicious fight. And once the host queen has been either expelled from the nest or killed, the cuckoo female is then free to lay her own eggs in the nest, using the workers of the social queen to raise those eggs through larvae to maturity, then as adult cuckoo bees. The point in the life cycle where the cuckoos do this, I think most of you will be familiar of the annual life cycle of our social bumblebees. So the previously mated queens wake up in the spring and start their nest, start laying their eggs and producing the waxy cells in which the young are raised. And once the social queen has produced a reasonable number of female worker daughters, that's where the cuckoo female will come in, and that's a good point then for her to take over the nest and use those workers to then bring up her own young, basically. There are no cuckoo workers. She doesn't produce worker females. She only produces females, large females like herself. So in cuckoos, we just have the large females, which are physically equivalent to a social queen, and males. Okay. So cuckoo bees don't collect pollen because they use the host's worker bees to do that. So they have no adapted hind leg. They produce very little wax. And as I've already said, they don't produce worker daughters. There's usually a time lag between the emergence of a particular host, social bumblebee, and its parasitic cuckoo bumblebee, because the cuckoo females need the nests of the social bumblebees to be reasonably well established by the time they emerge. Cuckoo bees exist at lower population numbers, lower abundance than their social counterparts, because obviously if they existed in numbers that were too high, it would mean that their hosts would decline. So as in, you know, most of these relationships in nature, it's a fine balance between, in any particular area, between the number of social bumblebee host nests and corresponding cuckoo bumblebee numbers. Saying that, cuckoo bumblebees can produce quite high numbers of males in particular. So even though people are less familiar with cuckoo bumblebees, the males are often a good place to start, because in the late summer particularly, you can have quite high numbers in any particular area of male cuckoos hanging around in groups on plants like knapweed, sort of nectaring quite late into the summer, and you can get quite familiar with those once you start to get your eye in with this group. Okay, so some general ID features just to contrast them with the social bumblebees. So remember, we don't have queens, it's just the big females and males in the 6 cuckoo bumblebees. The species appear generally dark, and they're relatively large, well, the females are, compared to their social counterparts. So the females are built to fight really and take over the nests. They are quite big, strong bumblebees, and they appear robust. The cuticle is very noticeable because their hairs tend to be quite sparse. And you can often see that black integument shining through, and it is actually very, very, very thick to protect them from stings during fights. So many of the cuckoo females in particular will have dark and smoky wings in this particular individual. It's very, very noticeable. Several species have a notch in the tail of black hairs, so that's quite easily distinguishable. None of the social bumblebees have that. 2 species have these yellow flashes or saddlebags at the top of the white, so that's something to look out for. The cuckoo females do not have an adapted hind leg. They don't have that flattened shiny tibia or pollen basket, as we call it. Their legs are more uniformly narrow and dull and hairy. Okay, so that's quite a significant difference. And the cuckoos are all relatively short-tongued, and they have quite short, sort of boxy faces and heads. So that can distinguish them as, again, from some of their social counterparts. Okay, so a little bit more detail on the legs. So we have sketches here on the left of a female social bumblebee with a hairless, shiny hind tibia or pollen basket with the long, stiff hairs on the outer edges, but the front-facing surface is shiny and smooth. The male social bumblebee, the leg is not widened in the same way, and it is hairy, sometimes quite sparsely hairy in some social males, but it will have hairs, and the hairs on the side are less obvious. The cuckoo female here and male on the right, obviously this is only a very simple sketch, but it effectively shows that they're much hairier legged, basically, and those fine tibia are much more dull and densely hairy than their social counterparts. And just to show that photographically, There you have the pollen basket on the left of the female social bumblebee, and then the hairier hind leg of the male. But you can see in the cuckoos, by comparison, the hairs are very dense and the legs are very narrow, uniformly narrow, particularly spindly in the males. Okay, so we shall go into a little bit more detail now about the 6 UK species. So bear with me, folks. It's not easy and it takes time to do these 6 species. So, you know, this is just an introduction. They can be very, very difficult in the field. So we'll start with this pair of very similar species, the southern cuckoo, Bombus vestalis, and the gypsy cuckoo, Bombus bohemicus. I am going to use mostly Latin names in this talk because the common names of the cuckoos are many and varied, and it is quite confusing. So we'll try and stick with the Latin. Okay. So both of these species are very similar. They're predominantly black with yellow collars, white tails, and yellow saddlebags to a greater extent in vestalis, lesser extent in bohemicus. So Bombus vestalis, you can see from the distribution map. These maps are a little bit out of date, but they give us an idea of the general distribution across the UK. This has a southerly distribution, as you can see. And as we've already described, the females are predominantly black with a deep, deep yellow collar behind the head, which can often appear quite dark as it can have quite a lot of black hairs intermingled in there within that yellow collar. There's no other yellow banding on the body until we get to the tail with the yellow saddlebags, and in vestalis, when the specimens are fresh, those yellow flashes are very, very noticeable, and there is a notch in the middle, okay, as you can see in the diagram up here. And then their white tail. Okay, you can see her lack of pollen baskets there. Okay, this species has quite a neat velvety appearance. It's a really impressive bee. When you see the females, they are big. They are bigger than terrestris queens, their host, the buff-tailed bumblebee. So yeah, they're really, really impressive insects. The males are similar in their patterning. The yellow collar tends not to be quite so deeply coloured. And they can have a little bit of yellow on the abdomen as well, at the waist there. They are noticeably elongate and slim in the field. This particular specimen isn't, the hairs are very sparse, so the white tail looks almost striped, and the yellow flashes can fade quite quickly because the males spend a long time outside. So this one here is very faded, but on this one here you can see the yellow flash there above the tail, and when they're fresh, that's quite distinctive in vestalis. Okay. So here's a comparison of the females. They both have the yellow collar and it's quite deep. In both of them, it can have the black hairs interspersed through, making it appear very dark. In the buff-tailed bumblebee, in the host, they almost always have that second yellow abdominal band breaking up the black of the abdomen, not so in vestalis. You can see the broad shiny pollen basket there in terrestris. Okay, and you can see the narrow leg there in vestalis, but obviously that's true of all comparison between the female social and female cuckoos. But for these two specifically, the buff-tailed bumblebee has its buff tail, which is never white in the queen. The female cuckoo has the white tail with the yellow flashes, distinct bright yellow flashes at the top. especially when she's nice and fresh. Okay, moving on to Bombus bohemicus, the gypsy cuckoo. The host species are the white-tailed bumblebees, Bombus lucorum, cryptarum, and magnus, which together make a complex of species we refer to as Bombus lucorum ag, or aggregate, because they're all very, very similar. So they host bohemicus, and you can see it has quite a different distribution from vestalis. So much more northerly distribution in line with its host species. So superficially similar to vestalis, with the yellow collar, which is brighter in bohemicus and never has black hairs through the yellow, so it always appears brighter. It is fluffier, not so neat in appearance, and average is slightly smaller as well. So it's a little bit of a sort of more, it's a finer species, if you like. It's not quite so bulky. The females do have the yellow patches on the tail, but they are paler. They don't stand out as much. Okay, but when they're fresh, you know, they are noticeable and do have a slight notch, but they're not as strong as in vestalis. And the females can have a reduced band and a smattering of yellow hairs on the back of the thorax as well. Okay, but not always. And you can see there in the diagram, that's indicated by that pale sort of yellow edge. It can be very, very challenging to separate bohemicus males from vestalis males in the field. This is something that we are going to look at more in a later video, some more detail. But basically, again, they average slightly smaller, they're fluffier. The yellow flashes above the white tail are lesser, they're paler, but also bohemicus males tend to have more noticeable yellow banding around the midriff there. So look out for that, fluffier, more yellow banding, slightly smaller and finer species. Okay, but can be really, really challenging. So sometimes you can't separate those two males very easily in the field. And again, a little comparison between the females, the queen host, and the female cuckoo. So again, the white-tailed bumblebees and bohemicus have that yellow collar. In the white-tailed bumblebees, you have a nice bright yellow abdominal band right in the middle of the abdomen there, not so in bohemicus. Again, we know that the legs are different, and in this one, you know it's not the cuckoo because it's carrying a big pollen lump, which the cuckoos never do. White tail in the white-tailed bumblebee complex, white tail in bohemicus, but with pale yellow flashes notched as well above the white. Okay. So our next pair are similar to the last two, but they do not have the yellow above the tail, okay, above the white of the tail in either species. So it's quite a key difference in terms of field characteristics. So we've got the forest cuckoo, Bombus sylvestris, and Barbut's cuckoo, Bumblebee, Bombus barbutellus. So firstly, sylvestris. Okay, this is rather a lovely species, I personally think. It is parasitic on the early heath and bilberry bumblebees. Obviously, of those, the early bumblebee is really very prevalent in gardens, very commonly observed, and consequently, it's quite nice. You do tend to get sylvestris in similar places, so you can find this species relatively easily. Again, quite a southern distribution, and like its host, it is relatively small, round and fluffy. compared to some of the other cuckoos. So this is a female sylvestris, and you can see she is indeed rather fluffy and has rather a rounded appearance. They're pretty much all black, although in addition to the yellow collar, she may have a few yellow hairs around the midriff region at the top of the abdomen, but not very significant at all. You're basically looking for a bumblebee with a yellow collar and a white tail. This species does tend to have its abdomen curled under, adding to the round appearance of the species. It's quite a noticeable feature, actually. And you tend to see them like in the springtime on things like dandelions, kind of climbing around quite slowly on the top of dandelions. So do look out for that. The males are rather beautiful, but also very variable and can be quite tricky to get to grips with. So again, I'm only giving you an introduction here to get you started. Another name for sylvestris is the four-coloured cuckoo, and this is because of the colouring of the males. So looking at the diagram, they are predominantly black, but with a yellow collar. This is the common form, and then have this white banding towards the tail end of the abdomen, and then a segment of black hairs followed by a very tip of orangey red hairs at the very end. And if you think of particularly Ptorum and Monticola, both of those obviously have red at the tails to varying degrees. So that's the common form of the male cuckoo, but it's highly variable, and you can have forms that have much more black on them, that lack the red hairs at the tip, that have more yellow on the abdomen. So you have to be very, very wary with this species. And here, so on the first picture, you can see the fluffiness of these males. They're very attractive little bees when they're fresh. Lovely yellow collar there. You can see the white on the tail segment, and even in this picture, just at the very tip there, you can see the hint of orangey red. The second picture, you can see this how sparsely haired this particular individual is. So you can see the white hairs, then black, and then orange there just at the tip. Okay, so it's quite a tricky one. There's another image of a female. You see they like composites with their short tongues. So her yellow collar and her white tail, and no abdominal yellow band. There's a group of males which sometimes occurs in sort of May, I would say June time. Well, June probably for the males of this species. And you can see there, that's a photograph from Wales, and you can see that male is much, much darker in form, but you can still see that sort of fluffy appearance and a hint of a yellow collar there. Okay. Right, on to the second one that is similar, Barbut's cuckoo bee. Okay, so we're looking at a southerly distribution, and this species is a cuckoo on Bombus hortorum, the garden bumblebee, small garden bumblebee, and Bombus ruderatus, the large garden bumblebee. So the females have a clear yellow band behind the head, the collar, quite deeply coloured, but they also have a distinct and clear yellow band at the rear of the thorax, just the same as their host species. So you can see in the diagram there, you've got that sort of almost circular effect there of the bands at the front and the back of the thorax. Any yellow on the abdomen is weaker. It may be there, but it's much weaker. And then we've got this lovely white tail. Okay. The males are similar. Again, you can see they're quite fluffy. They're much smaller than the females. You can see his long, spindly cuckoo male legs there, very, very dull and hairy. But again, lovely yellow collar and yellow both on the back of the thorax and on the abdomen. So again, mirroring the males, certainly of Bombus hortorum, with quite a lot of yellow on both the thorax and the abdomen, and then a lovely white tail. Okay, unlike Bombus hortorum and ruderatus, these species do not have long faces. Okay, so that is a good field characteristic to separate the cuckoos from their hosts. And that's shown more clearly here. So we've got a queen garden bumblebee there, compared with a female Bombus barbutellus cuckoo. They both have the yellow collar. The social species has that long face, which is absolutely typical of Bombus hortorum. I've just noticed a spelling mistake there in that Latin name. Please forgive me. And the cuckoo, but barbutellus has a much shorter face. In the social bumblebee queen, strong midriff bands on both the thorax and the abdomen. In the cuckoo, the thoracic band is strong, but the abdominal bands are weaker. Okay, not quite so obvious, and they both have their nice white tails. Okay, so we're going to go into our last two species now. These aren't in a pair because they're quite different. The red-tailed cuckoo, Bombus rupestris, is very, very distinctive. And its host, as you might guess, is Bombus lapidarius. Again, a southern distribution for this species. The females are really distinctive, so they look very similar to their host species females, queens, but their wings in this species are very, very dark. You know, they will look black. They're quite stunning. It is a big cuckoo bee as well. These females are really big and tough looking. They're often quite sparsely haired. It's not quite as noticeable in this specimen, but they often appear very, very shiny with the integument shining through. So look out for that, because you can see, you know, through to the sort of integument very often in this species. The males are highly variable and much trickier. So they can be similar to red-tailed social bumblebee males, lapidarius males, but crucially, they don't have a yellow face. So very often they look like these two images. So red tail, so that's a constant, but the yellow is highly variable and can be almost a greyish straw colour. And you can see this one has more yellow on it. So it's got the collar a bit like a red tail male, and a bit of yellow at the back of the thorax, and more scattered yellow hairs on the abdomen as well. So you can tell it's a male cuckoo because it doesn't have that yellow face. The back legs are extremely thin and spindly and very, very hairy. Just to go back to compare the females. So a red-tailed social female, Bombus lapidarius, tends to be rather neat and velvety, rather beautiful. Her cuckoo equivalent, rupestris, tends to be much sparser haired, with the integument shining through. The social red tail has pale wings, and the cuckoo red tail has very dark, often black wings. And as usual, this one you can see is carrying pollen on her pollen baskets. The cuckoo female, no pollen baskets, and both have very similar deep red tails. Okay. There's another Bombus rupestris male, and you can see this one had no yellow on it at all. But I could see it was, so it looked superficially like a red-tailed worker female, a social bumblebee female, but there are no pollen baskets. It has really skinny hind legs, which were really hairy, long antennae, very typical of the male. And from these features, and looking closely at its behaviour and overall appearance, it became apparent quite quickly this was a male Bombus rupestris, living on a sunny hill in Wales, in fact, and that's another common name for this species, the hill cuckoo bee. So this one was living up to one of its names. Okay, and last but not least, the field cuckoo bumblebee, Bombus campestris. So this species is a cuckoo bee of the common carder, Bombus pascorum, and probably other carders as well, some of the rarer carders. So it has almost kind of an appearance of gingeriness. Okay, so there is a picture of female Bombus campestris. It is an incredibly distinctive species. It's hard to mix it up with anything else, really. Again, the hairs are very sparse, so it can appear very, very shiny. It has this, the females have this broad yellow band at the front of the thorax, and often more yellow hairs at the back of the thorax. The tail has these yellow hairs on the side, but there's often black in between. So there's quite an extended notch. As you can see there, tail pale at sides and black in the center. Okay, so this is a really distinctive species. The males, again, are extremely variable, and basically there are two main forms. So the yellow form, you can see here and in the diagram, has the yellow collar. It has yellow around the midriff, both on the thorax and the abdomen, and the yellow tail. Okay, very, very attractive little bee. But there is also an all black form of Bombus campestris male, and there are some that are sort of intermediate between those two, so highly, highly variable. So, you know, you have to be really careful in the field, and do have a look at a lot of their guides and resources to have a look at more examples of this species. So that leads me neatly onto resources. So this sheet here, if you go to our website, this is downloadable in our BID section and on the Be the Change website. Stephen Falk's book is excellent resource guide for the cuckoo bumblebees, and also the Bumblebee Conservation Trust book is good, perhaps first step for beginners, because that only has the bumblebees, the social and cuckoo bumblebees of the UK, whereas Stephen Falk's guide does have all of these solitary bees as well. So it's a little bit more comprehensive and detailed, but the nice thing about the Bumblebee Conservation Trust book is quite a lot of photographs in as well for you to build up your sort of experience around each species before going into the field. Stephen Falk also has his Flickr pages. So if you Google these, it will take you to Stephen's collections, which is a wonderful online resource. All of the cuckoos are on there. And also there is a crib sheet for the cuckoos on Stephen's page. That's really useful. There's also the very friendly and incredibly knowledgeable Bee Wars Facebook group where you can post pictures for help with ID. So if you're on Facebook, I strongly recommend you becoming a member of the Bee Wars Facebook group. Please don't forget to submit your records when you get a bit more confident with your IDs through the Lurk Wales app and the iRecord app. Both things are the same, effectively the same software. It's just that the Lurk version is bilingual and is managed by the 4 local record centres in Wales, but both systems are connected basically, so you can use either. Okay, thank you very much. I hope that's been helpful and that you've enjoyed, and you can contact me with any further questions or information that you'd like to receive. Do get in touch, and thank you for listening.